ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ. Beloved Sangat, before we begin, I must confess, I'm not here as someone who has mastered the art of living in perfect harmony with Hukum. I've wrestled with it, I've argued with it, I've even tried to negotiate with it, as if the universe were some kind of cosmic shopkeeper willing to adjust the terms of reality if I just asked in the right way. But over time, beloved, I've noticed something. Life has its own rhythm. Call it Hukum, call it Tao, call it the will of the divine. It is the great flow into which all things are born, move, and return. And here's the strange thing. Whether we agree with it or not, it's happening. Like the tide that comes in without asking our permission. Most of us spend our lives resisting this flow. We cling to what's passing. We reach for what hasn't yet arrived. We build elaborate plans for how reality should be. And then, when life refuses to follow our script, we call it bad luck or misfortune. But beloved, the saints and indeed the sages of every tradition tell us something far more radical. Hukum is not here to serve your preferences. Hukum is the very order by which the stars spin, the rivers run, and you take your next breath. Beloved, to live in alignment with Hukum is not resignation, it's not giving up. It's more like dancing. You don't control the music, you listen, you feel, and you move. And in this dance, something shifts. The weight of me and my plans begin to loosen. You stop fighting the river, and perhaps for the first time, you feel yourself floating, not aimlessly, but held, carried, moved exactly where you are meant to be. And so today, let's explore Hukum, not as a doctrine to obey, but as an invitation to trust, to discover what happens when the ego loosens its grip and the soul steps in time with the rhythm that has always been playing. And perhaps, before we plunge too far into this idea of Hukum, I should say, these words are not the voice of an expert, but of a fellow wanderer. If I speak about the flow of the divine, it's not because I always live in it, far from it. There are days I forget the current entirely, thrashing about in the waters of my own opinions and judgments, only to remember, with a smile, that the river was carrying me all along. So what follows is not instruction from a high place, but a reflection from the road. A road we are all walking, whether we know it or not. And perhaps this is the beauty of Hukum. It is always here, whether we understand it or resist it. And even in our confusion, we are still within it. Even when we imagine we have stepped outside the circle, we are still standing in the center. So, as we speak today, you might listen not for answers, but for recognition, that quiet moment when something said resonates deep inside, as if you already knew it before you heard it. Because that too is Hukum, the mysterious alignment of hearing exactly what you needed, exactly when you needed it. You know, I think we've all had this experience. You're sitting in traffic, you're late, your hands are gripping the steering wheel like they're holding on to the fate of the universe, and yet nothing moves. The light's still red. The car ahead hasn't budged, and the clock is merciless. And then maybe only for a moment you realize that something. This is exactly what's happening, whether I like it or not. Now, that little realization, that's Hukum peeking through the cracks, You see, most of us live under this strange illusion that life is a sort of negotiation. If I plan well enough, if I do all the right things, the world will fall into place according to my design. But reality doesn't sign contracts with us. It moves by its own rhythm, its own law, its own order. And when we fight that order, psychologically speaking, it's exhausting. It's like trying to paddle upstream all day long. Because you're not just dealing with what's happening, you're dealing with your resistance to what's happening. Double the effort, double the stress. The funny thing is, the moment you start to trust Hukum, not as some lofty religious concept, but simply by saying, this is what's here right now, something inside you loosens. You stop wasting all that energy trying to rewrite reality, and suddenly you're got energy left for for living. And please understand, acceptance is not the same as giving up. Giving up says nothing matters, but acceptance says this matters enough to see clearly what's really here. It's like moving from being the manager of life to being its dance partner. You listen for the beat before you move. You feel the current before you steer. And when you do that, beloved, anxiety begins to dissolve. Not because life suddenly goes your way, but because you stop measuring every moment by whether it matches your expectations. It's like a sailor who finally learns to work with the wind instead of against it, because the sea hasn't changed. The waves still rise and fall, but the voyage feels smoother because the sailor is finally moving with the current. And it's when the sailor learns to work with the wind rather than against it, the voyage becomes smoother. The sea hasn't changed, but the way the sailor meets it does. And that is the beginning of aligning with Hukum. And that right there is the first step, aligning with Hukum. And so, talked about Hukum as it feels psychologically, this loosening of the grip, this moving with the current instead of against it. But spiritually, Hukum isn't just about relieving our stress. It's about seeing the very nature of reality. In the Sikh tradition, Hukum is not merely God's command in the way a king might order his subjects. It's closer to saying, this is the divine order, the way existence itself is arranged. Guru Nanak Dev Ji says in Japji Sahib, Hukum andar sab ko, bahar hukum na koi. All are within Hukum, none are outside it. This means this order isn't something imposed from above. It is the structure of reality. It is the current in which all rivers flow. Spiritually, this is confronting because it invites us to ask, if everything is moving in Hukum, what is this me that thinks it's in control? Now, I'm not suggesting we sit around doing nothing, but quite the opposite. But when you see that your very thoughts, your impulses, your actions are themselves part of the great unfolding, something changes. You stop trying to stand outside of life and instead you feel yourself moving with it. It's like the difference between a leaf imagining it separate from the wind and the leaf realizing, I am the wind in motion. In the Bhagavad Gita, called the Nishkama Karma, action without desire for the fruits. In Sikhi, the teaching call it living in Hukum. In Christianity, mystics speak of surrendering to divine providence. Different names, same truth. The ego wants to write the script, but the soul says, let me be the pen in the author's hand. And here's where it gets beautifully paradoxical. You think surrendering to Hukum means losing your freedom, but in the lived experience, it's the opposite. You're freed from the tyranny of constant self-concern. You stop acting from the cramped, fearful space of how does this affect me, and start acting from the open, spacious awareness of what is being asked of me now. The Gurumukhs, those who live in alignment with Hukum, are like rivers flowing to the sea. They don't force themselves to be generous or kind or wise. It's just the way the current moves through them. And living in Hukum feels like trusting the hands of a master potter. You don't always know the shape you're being turned into, but you trust the touch. You trust that even the pressure, even the heat of the kiln are part of your becoming. And once you see this, beloved, you no longer think of Hukum as a rule you must obey. It becomes the very song you're dancing to. So, spiritually speaking, Hukum is not something you believe in, so much as something you notice. It's not about handing over control. It's about realizing you never had it to begin with. It's like lying back in a river after years of splashing against the current and suddenly feeling it carry you effortlessly exactly where you were meant to go all along. Beloved, so far we've been speaking as though there's me and there's Hukum and my task is to align myself with it. And yes, that's a good starting point. It gives the ego something to work with, an image of me getting better at going with the flow. But mystically speaking, the deeper you go into Hukum, the more that picture begins to dissolve. The mystics tell us all is within Hukum, none are outside it. And if that's really true, then it means even the idea of me choosing to align is itself part of Hukum. It's a bit like the ocean saying to a wave, all right now, try to be a part of me. The wave might puff up with effort, but the truth is, it never stopped being the ocean. In the same way, you cannot step outside of Hukum to then step back in. You've been in it from the beginning. What changes is only the seeing. And when this dawns on you, not as an idea, but as lived experience, the sense of being the doer starts to fade. You no longer think, I am serving or I am surrendering. Instead, you feel service is happening. Surrender is happening through this particular form you call me. Bhagat Kabirji said, when I was, God was not. Now God is, and I am not. Bhagat Kabirji is not talking about physical disappearance. They're talking about the ego melting away, leaving only the one reality flowing as everything. And at this level, even the distinction between good events and bad events start to soften, because you see that the same current that brings spring flowers also brings autumn leaves. The same wind that fills the sails can also topple the boat, but the wind is the wind. And from seeing this, life becomes less about control and more about intimacy. An intimacy with all things, because there's no longer me over here and that over there. There's just the one light playing all these different roles. And when a person reaches this point, they don't walk around thinking, I am enlightened or I am aligned. In fact, beloved, they tend to think about themselves less and less. They are simply present, responsive, alive, like a flute that plays whatever tune the breath moves through it. The saints don't claim to live in Hukum. They simply are Hukum in motion. It's like the drop that finally realizes it has always been the ocean. It doesn't dissolve in sorrow, it dissolves in laughter. because it sees all along there was no me learning to surrender. There was only the one playing at being me, learning to surrender to itself. And so, beloved, taking Hukum into the mind, into the heart, and even into that mystical place where there's no me and Hukum at all. But here we are, you and I, sitting in a room. The tea is getting cold, and in a few hours we'll have to decide what to eat for dinner, or answer an email, or help a friend move a heavy sofa. So what does it mean to live in Hukum on an ordinary today? What does it mean to live in Hukum on an ordinary today? Well, beloved, it starts very simply by noticing how much of our life is spent pushing for results, for recognition, for things to go our way. You see, living in Hukum is not about becoming passive. It's about replacing constant pushing with deep listening. Listening to the tone beneath someone's words. Listening to your own inner compass before reacting. Listening to what the moment itself is asking of you instead of bulldozing it with your plans. Hukum doesn't keep score. There's no cosmic leaderboard for most spiritual, best servant of the divine. And if you find yourself doing a good deed and then quietly polishing your halo, just smile at it. Recognize the ego's little habit and then gently return to serving without needing to make a story of it. The traffic jam, the sudden kindness from a stranger, the illness, the promotion, the heartbreak. Living in Hukum means seeing each of these as part of the same river. Not always pleasant, but always purposeful, sometimes in ways we only understand years later. Even the saints forget, beloved. So what chance do we have? The practice isn't to never forget, it's to keep returning. Returning in Simran, in stillness, in gratitude, in those tiny pauses where you remember, yes, I am being carried. Beloved, living in Hukum isn't about getting it right all the time. It's about waking up moment by moment to the fact that life is already holding you. And so perhaps the most practical step is this. The next time you feel lost, don't try to force your way forward. Instead, take a breath, feel the current, and let it carry you. Beloved, we've wandered together through the idea of Hukum, beginning with our anxious little attempts to control life, moving through the joy of trust, stepping into the mystical dissolving of me and it, and returning to the simple daily dance of listening, serving, and remembering. If anything I've said has struck a true note in your heart, then give thanks, not to me, but to that current we've been talking about all along. And beloved, if I have said anything mistaken, unclear, or unhelpful, please forgive me. That too is just my human clumsiness in trying to put the infinite into words. Because you see, beloved, Hukum is not a concept we master. It is the melody that was playing before we were born and will go on long after our words are forgotten. My hope is simply that together we've stopped for a while to listen, to let us go from here not with a burden of trying to remember Hukum, but with a lightness as if we've just noticed we are floating in a great river that carries us all. And in that noticing, perhaps we can trust the current and let it take us to where it will. Because Hukum is not a theory to master. It is the melody that was playing before you were born and will go on long after we have all left this stage. My hope is simply that for a short while today, we we have stopped together to listen. So let us go from here, not with the burden of trying to remember Hukum, but with a lightness, as if we've just realised we are floating in a great river that carries us all. And in that noticing, perhaps we can trust the current and let it take us to where it will. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.